Conversation that we've been having for a while. Tonight, let's settle down and unpack it a bit more. The militarization of the civil space. Over the last 1 week, we've had that conversation again. But there are many other instances where we've seen the military playing roles that ordinarily the police should play, which obviously sometimes then pitches the military against the civilian population. In the midst of that, sometimes journalists are caught in the midst of that. Just last week when my colleague was assaulted, we also know that the first person who was assaulted was a civilian who wasn't a journalist at all. So there's a bigger conversation to be had about the militarizing the civil space. Is this a necessary cost for order? Let's look at that. And if you look at this, first of all, isolating the assault on journalists for a second. The number of attacks on journalists between January and July 2025 is 13 cases, right? And this is the monitoring that we've been doing over the period. And so that tells you that there's something fundamentally is happening that we need to tackle. And then you look at the various sources of the assault. The first is the police and military personnel themselves assaulting journalists in question. You have political party supporters, you have illegal minors, or deciding they want to take the law into their own hands and punish journalists for doing their work. And anytime we have this conversation, you just have to, first of all, imagine your own profession. If somebody in the last January to July, 6 months, I tell you that 13 of the people or professionals and colleagues of yours have been assaulted, you have to pause to think, well, what's wrong? If you imagine that in January to July, 13 lawyers have been assaulted just for doing their jobs. 13 teachers have been assaulted. Nurses have been assaulted. 13 pilots have been assaulted. 13, just name it, right? That is the problem. We talk about what we say journalists assaulted. Sometimes people don't imagine or can't apprehend why we separate this and make a case out of that. When you begin to think about it in your own professional terms, maybe you begin to appreciate why this is such a big deal to talk about. But we don't want to make this about just the assault on journalists, because we know that once the military enters the civil space, our experience shows that they tend to act in ways that always raises questions about whether they can rein themselves in. You have at least 4 cases of military brutalities that we've recorded this year alone. A few of them that I need to recount over the period. We have the Carlos one. We have in March 2027, 7 soldiers beat 3 civilians over what we know is a stolen mobile phone in Kumasi. That became an issue. In February 2025, brutality during a Wale curfew enforcement was also reported. We have illegal miners killed in Anglo-Gold Ashanti, a mine breach. Again, questions were asked about how that was handled. 2023, March, military raid in Ashaiman, the most famous one, of course. A lot of writing about that. In 2021, soldiers stormed Parliament, the Chamber of Parliament. That again, we're told was going to be investigated. Nobody had known what really came of that investigation. And then you look at the GJA itself in terms of what they've said. That is the cases where journalists get caught up in that assault. They are now thinking about other drastic means of trying to hold these individuals accountable, pursuing diplomatic sanctions, a ban from international missions, and then civil suits against officers in question, some of the things that they've looked at. But again, the armed forces have a particular role they play, which is to defend against external threats. The police have their role too, handling domestic security, but we've seen that sometimes we have to call in the armed forces. It is when we call in the armed forces, or men in uniform, military uniforms, that we begin to see this unfold. For example, why did we have armed forces or men in uniform, military fatigue from the Ghana Armed Forces supervising a demolition exercise? Is a question that has been asked. But this is not the first time we've seen the military in civilian affairs when we know that their primary role is protecting from external threats. But sometimes we have to call on them. We know that they are in Boku right now doing peace enforcement, as the president puts it. And we know that the president, of course, controls them, but he is allowed to also assign the military to other functions. And so he is a commander-in-chief, and he, like in the Boku case, has dispatched them to work. So far, they've been very professional there, but as you know, they are constantly now on the watch. Immediately the military is deployed, apprehensions become one that we keep a very close eye on. Then you look at how all this then begins to affect our world press freedom, and you see the trending downwards there. We've not been doing great over the period because of the so many cases of assault on journalists in particular. You also see the world's, Ghana's World Press Freedom Global Ranking also dipped quite significantly and has begun to climb back up. So there's something fundamentally happening that we need to tackle. This obviously is affecting our human rights record as well, which is currently 3.5. It's not great, right? The last data available is something that we're looking at. In the sub-region, Ghana is not alone when it comes to the way we are sending military in to deal with challenges once there is internal disturbance. Nigeria has that too. You've seen that also in neighboring countries where Yadima, for example, had dispersed and used military to foil civilian unrest there, if you like. So this is not something that we are alone in, except that in Ghana, yes, a bit more, not as aggressive and robust as we've seen, for example, in Togo. But yes, still, as the records show, it's played a role. You go to Kenya, we've seen the same thing, military deployed during the anti-tax protests in 2024. So let's have this conversation. We don't want it to be journalists are the only group of people who are attacked. Yes, we are attacked, and I've shown you the evidence. But there's a bigger challenge there of militarizing the civilian space, and how we tackle this is the subject of many committees and commissions that have been set up to look into this, but somehow it keeps recurring. My guest will weigh in on that from a bigger picture point of view once we sit for a conversation. Stay with me. And thanks for staying with us here on PM Express. My guest joining me for a conversation tonight is Professor Kojo Epidie. He's a professor of international law, University of Ghana. Also joining me is Dr. Ishmael Norman. He is the president of the Institute for Security Disaster Emergency Studies. Joins me via Zoom. And in the studio with me is the champion of press freedom himself, Engineer Dr. Kenneth Ashibe. Joins me in the studio. He's a media practitioner. He's also the chief executive of the Chamber of the Ghana Chamber of Mines. He's a man of many parts, and I'm delighted that he can join us in the studio for this conversation. And as you know, PMS is always brought to you by Syntex Tanks. It is strong, it is tough. It's also brought to you by Academic Times newspaper and a Pepsodent cavity fighter. And let's just go straight into it. The obvious reason why we're having this conversation is because of what happened last week. Dr. Ashibe, when my colleague was assaulted, Carlos. But we should not forget that the assault started on the civilian, who was quite assaulted also. Then it was turned on him. His equipment got damaged. He himself received hefty blows. I remember I had to call in the Interior Minister first of all, he was picked up, was sent into Bluegate, and the Interior Minister quickly, thanks to him, intervened and got him released, and then we have to send him to the hospital. And I must say something, just by way of disclosure. Way back in the day when I was beating, you were my GM. And we have to tell the story before we start. And I had covered an NDC demonstration, the Wahala demonstrations. Yes. And I was assaulted with horsewhip. And I came to the office, and you yourself and Cox, Stomacho, because I had said that I had misidentified one of the NDC. I don't know if you remember the story. It was a big deal. I think it was Atwa and I said Kwame and Ahoy. They lived together. And He said he was sitting, we had called him on air.
Yeah.
I think I'm sitting at a bus stop, they should come in, come in. And then so you guys drove there. You remember?
I do. I do. You know what I mean? For me...
and so you've been a champion of this.
Evans.
And this is possibly, I've done this, 21 years? This is possibly 18, 19, 17 years ago.
Yeah.
And he hasn't stopped. We're still talking about
exactly. And Evans, and for me, and that's the gravity of the challenge that confronts us, that this thing, never stops. We're beating even by past us at some points, Yeah. And, I definitely get it that it's not only the journalist that is beating, but you will find out that even those people who are beating us because there were some journalists around them. Yeah. And again, we tend to forget that all of this is not really about the journalist. It's about our freedom of speech. It's about our access to information as citizens. That's what results in this. And I think you are spot on. But the interesting thing is that when you're listing it, you did not list the fact that politicians, when have we, attacked the politicians? And if we say we are the fourth estate of the realm, who beats the first estate? The second and the third? Nobody does that. And so we need as a people to realize the fact that this thing is not sustainable when a journalist is doing his job and then you disagree with the person and you think that the way to go at it is attack them. And especially for me, when it is the police, when it's the military, when there are political parties that are involved. Criminals like illegal miners, and all of that, they are criminals, so you deal with that. But when the people who have to actually, preserve the rule of law in this country tend to the people who are perpetuating it, as we said, the police headquarters that is supposed to be the citadel of law enforcement. You had Latif. Yeah. His call is cracked. And currently we have that situation that we're dealing with it. So I think that, again, so for me, I've seen this happen. And the reason why I get so passionate about this is apart from the fact that this is at the foundation of our democracy, our freedoms and all, is that people like myself, since 2000, when I joined, multimedia, my salaries have been paid because the likes of you would go out into the field and go and do this job. And on the back of that, we will gather audiences, get advertisers, and we'll pay our salaries. And so it's unconscionable. I will not be able to sleep when I see these things happen. And, and for me, one of the places I come to, which is a safe haven when it comes to this particular fight, is multimedia. Because sometimes even our journalists themselves, our other media houses, have not shown the kind of, teeth that we need to bear when these things happen. At least in multimedia, if we're not getting issues dealt with so far as, the criminal cases are concerned, at least we'll go to the civil court and be able to get some reprieve. And I also need to dub my heart out now that the belligerence of the GJA and its president is one of the reasons why when it came to voting, I campaigned for him because I thought that this is a very important thing that we need to do. I'm not too sure whether the NMC, we've had the NMC in all of this. No. And you see, and George is my friend, but it's not him, it's more the commissioners. I don't know who currently the NMC chairperson is. And for us not to have heard the voice of the NMC chairperson in situations like this tend to be worrying because they are supposed to be the bastions of our freedom of speech, of the freedom of the journalist and all of that. And so it is important that all of us will rally. And again, so we talk about the Minister for Interior and what he did. Yeah. Also the president himself. But it is worrying that we saw the faces of these military men. And up till now, we've not had the military high command tell us that there's been any interdiction of these people who are involved. At least prima facie. You see that happening. I don't know what investigations, again, anybody would want to carry.
I mean, you raise a very important point. Anytime the military is involved in something like this, it's hard to even get transparency around, okay, so what has happened in terms of investigations?
Correct.
The president, who is a commander-in-chief, was very clear in this directive.
Right.
Investigate and let's sanction.
Correct.
But who is going to tell us whether they are investigating? Okay, so I can confirm something, though. last week, the military high command sent a team here, and they sat with Carlos and one of my other colleagues, and they interviewed Carlos, as in gathering the evidence. So that I can confirm.
Correct.
That investigations have happened. I only know because I work here. So if I wasn't working here, nobody else would know that the investigation indeed is happening.
Yes.
Right? Isn't that part of the problem?
No, I think it's, again,
the opacity around what is happening.
Again, I think it's a major
The police officer who assaulted the reporter in Ablekumanov immediately says on the issue that he's interdicted and we knew what was happening. But the soldiers...
Yes, and again, for the police officer too as well, that's a novelty. It's not something that has been happening, in the past. You had the situation where the police high command tells us that the CCTV footage when Lateef was assaulted cannot be found. It's mind-boggling. And how many police people have we not seen go through this route? But when it comes to the military, unfortunately, the situation has been very dark, very, opaque, and you don't get to hear it. And I don't know, I'm sure it's all about, rallying the men and all, but it's important for the military to see that when you have situations like this happen, and you have people who, go out and sin openly, the question you even be asking is that who would send military people to go into the space they had gone into?
Yeah, I mean, supervising a demolition exercise.
Correct. Where there's been...
Another fundamental question has still not been asked.
Definitely.
Answered, actually.
Who's done that? Again, so that's for me, it's definitely we need a military at some points where the police are the wits end, you bring the military in. So the situation in Boko is a typical example. The examples in some of the mining areas where, the challenges that confront you, the police are not able to deal with, you bring them in. Because again, so that's why for me, I'm not too worried about, the militarization to some extent. But if it comes to the demolition of, of a property, which we know, in that space that we're talking about, the police could have easily handled. Why is it that the military were there? But even if they're there and these things have happened, it is important for the police, the military high command, to realize the fact that where we are currently, it's not like in the past where you will not get footage. This thing happened on live TV.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We can see these people. We know these people. So when you don't deal with them, then what you then tend to do, and then when you handle them, you come to Joy FM, come and do an interview. We don't hear anything. The people who are involved in it, nobody knows it. It just emboldens the rest of them to continue to do this. So I would urge the military that in this particular situation, this man, look at him. You can see him on TV. Everybody can see him, And the interesting thing, again, in all of this is that there are some people who are not in military gear. You see them on TV. They're worried, but they're carrying, ammunition. It's the same thing that happened when you had the Forestry Commission, where you had people go there with even policemen in their presence, and they were wielding weapons. So for me, I think it's important that, we find a way of dealing with this issue. This man, for example, we should be told what has happened to him.
Yeah, I mean, let me bring in Dr. Ishmael Norman. Doc, you're watching that playback there, and this was a demolition exercise that the men in uniform, the soldiers, had gone to supervise. But give me your comment on that. I mean, is that standard practice for members of the Ghana Armed Forces to be supervising demolition exercises? Please unmute for me.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much, Evans. And sorry about that. I think that I strongly associate with Engineer Dr. Ashbe. Just about everything he said could have come out of my mouth. I raised an issue on Saturday on another TV program that there are 43,000 plus police officers in this country. There are just about 16,000 or so soldiers. And every event, we are calling on soldiers. Meanwhile, they are not trained in domestic policing skills. Evans, can you believe that I'm being questioned already for making that statement or making other statements?
Oh, you are being questioned by?
I won't go into that. At the right time, it will come out.
Okay.
Transparency in the military is an oxymoron because it's structured on need to know only. And so if they think that you don't have a need to know, they will never tell you. And so for me, I have a problem in deploying military to do a job, domestic job, that the Ghana police is so well fitted, so well trained, because of the experience in community engagement, community policing, and so on and so that. Are these soldiers over there? Are they from the military police? They are not. They don't have any skills in dealing with these kinds of escalation. And there was no escalation. Carlos was basically interviewing an eyewitness. And because they didn't want Carlos to see the camera to capture what was going on, because they decided that Carlos doesn't have a right to report, that the people there don't have a right to know what the military was doing. And that is why the soldier typically started beating on the civilian for doing absolutely nothing. Look at that. It's sad. And when you say it, they think you are exposing something that the military is doing. What they are doing is on camera. Everybody is seeing it. So why can't we talk about it? I'm not a coward. I'm not afraid of anybody. Nobody can suppress my freedom of speech. Nobody. I will not allow it. So what we are seeing is that in terms of the deployment in Boko, perfectly allowed by the Establishment Act of the Ghana Armed Forces, allowed by the Constitution of Ghana, Article 210 Clause 3, and Emergency Powers Act, Article 31, and of the Constitution, as well as the Emergency Powers Act, allows the Commander-in-Chief to deploy the military when he deems it's necessary. And that's exactly what President Mahama has done. But the moment some of us civilians start talking, we become already enemies. Why? Are we not taxpayers? Are we not citizens of this country? Look at that. Every time I see that side, it just, my head, something goes wrong in my head. It's so wrong for a soldier to start beating on a civilian simply because he's an eyewitness to a demolition exercise. The government of Ghana, even under the doctrine of domain, eminent domain, has the right to decide that we're going to construct a road through your house, and therefore we're taking over that house. If you build a house in a place where you are not supposed to, like the Ramsar site, the government of Ghana has the right to demolish. I am a disaster management specialist, probably the only one with a PhD in Ghana. I'm not boasting, I'm just telling it as it is. So the government has done no wrong to send the team to go and demolish properties that were built in the waterways in order to avoid flooding, in order to enrich the ecosystem so that all of us can reduce our carbon footprint. That's what the government is trying to do. But for the soldier, I'm sure this was not what his commanding officer told him to go and do. That shows that they are not well trained, because if they were, he wouldn't go and do that.
But Dr. Norman, you know, again, when I think we should isolate the military persons that are involved in it, because we've seen the military go into other spaces as well. And, you know, the military are normally very disciplined. I agree that when it comes to some of the civilian activities, they might not do it well. But in this particular instance, and I think you were spot on in saying that the commander would not have sent them to go and do this. So for me, we should not treat this exception of the military as the norm, because we've seen several situations where it's not gone like this. And we've also seen, you're talking about the police, but we've seen the police. You know, the situation in Ablekuma North. A senior police officer, you know, beating up a journalist. We've seen, and I think that if you go into the list of the occasions where, you know, people have been assaulted, you will find out that the police might even do more than they do. So, in as much as I think that this is definitely not acceptable, I think we should treat it as the exception rather than the norm. And, you know, maybe give the police the credit that is due. I am just hoping that the military too would want to quickly, you know, ensure that they protect their image by making sure they deal, you know, decisively with this person who has done this. Because there are several situations where we bring the military into situations like this, and we don't get this. But there are situations where the police that are supposed to do this, you know, where you find that they would also be the ones using the horsewhip. And I'm sure Evans, the story he told, I'm not too sure it was the military who would dish that out, you know. So, again, it's not as if our police themselves, you know, are any angels. And if you look just at the evidence, the propensity to do this, a lot more of it has been the police more than. And again, you then have this amorphous group also who call themselves the national security. There's the situation of Pius. You know, that happened during one of these elections where he has a bullet that is lodged in his leg, you know, that we're dealing with. So I would say that maybe, yes, and I would say this particular military people who went into the field and misbehaved, they should be treated, we should isolate them and deal with them, you know, as decisively as we ought, so that nobody else would do that. But I think generally the military have not been bad when it comes to these engagements.
Dr. Norman?
Nobody wants to demonize the military. I am hawkish about the military. But we can never forget Zoe at City News, where 64th Infantry Brigade, basically with very well armed weapons, went there to pursue two innocent reporters. We can never forget Ejura. We can never forget Ayawaso West Wagon. I don't want to keep on going on, because you see, it is okay to make an exception if it is just one event. But to use your term, the propensity for violence is part of the mentality of being a soldier. Because if you lose that, you cannot be a good soldier. However, in order to be able to control that propensity, the training has to be very specific to the objective. And that is why I raised issue this Saturday on another program, that I hope that we don't end up with a situation just like we had in Nigeria or in other places. And I also made a statement that I hope, you see, it's okay to militarize the civic space if the need arises, as in Boko, if a need arises as in illegal mining. Because the civic space, we are all beneficiaries of the negative implications of illegal mining on our health, the food we eat, the water we drink. So I don't have a problem with that. But I do have a problem when you see something, we're supposed to say something, and the moment you start to say something, you become the enemy.
I want to bring in Professor PJ into the conversation. Prof, you're looking at this from a constitutional human rights point of view. Let's examine, first of all, is there a legal basis? Because the Ghana Armed Forces itself is a creature of law. And so is there a legal basis, for example, to deploy the military in circumstances such as we saw where this journalist and the civilian was assaulted, demolition of a building? And really, how do you circumscribe what the military does under law?
Thanks for having me, Evans. Definitely what happened, there's no legal basis for what the military did. It is clear, the law is clear, that the military only has a limited role in internal security. That is a place reserved for the police. When necessary, when the police need extra support, then they will call in the military to provide support. Of course, we also have the military police that does some security work, but that is related to military installations and so on. This particular situation where there is demolition, I don't see why or where the place of the military comes in at all in the first place. So even if there had not been any assault or any brutalities committed by the soldiers, they were not supposed to be in that place at that particular moment at all, not in any shape or form. And so when such incidents happen, it calls into question the legality of the act being perpetrated in itself, in this case, the demolition. Because in most cases, there may be a situation where there may be a violation of the law. It could be an injunction by the court that you should not do this. But people take the law into their own hands and they use the military to protect the commission of these acts or use the military to actually commit these acts. So what happened there is not the place for the military. So for the military to go on to brutalize a journalist and an eyewitness is just appalling. If in this situation, if an offense had been committed, the place is not designated as a security zone. There were no maybe a poster or some information saying that it's a security zone, and therefore it is out of reach by any particular person, or you cannot take pictures and so on. That is a different thing. There's nothing like that in this particular situation. So whatever took place there was not under any legal authorization. And so for the soldiers to go to the extent of stopping a media person from performing his functions, and not only that, but brutalizing the media person, and then going to the extent of putting him in a vehicle, it constitutes assault, it constitutes arrest, unlawful arrest. And the same thing, unfortunately, when the incident happened, we seem to have overlooked the act which was also perpetrated on the innocent, unsuspecting civilian who was an eyewitness and was being interviewed by Carlos. That is also a serious violation on the rights and dignity of a human being, a citizen of Ghana. So the bottom line is that there have been serious violations of the law, resulting in serious violations of human rights on decent human beings who have not committed any offense. Even if an offense has been committed, there is a process, there are procedures to follow. You arrest the person, and in this case, the military people will be even considered as civilians performing this act of arresting somebody who the law allows for such arrest to be undertaken if the person is in the act of committing an offense. But you don't go the extrajudicial way by taking the law into your own hands and declaring the person guilty and inflicting punishment on the person. So certainly something has gone wrong, and we shouldn't just sit there and just condemn it, but something should be done. And I'm glad the GJ took that bold step. Multimedia also took that important step to make the world know that there's something wrong there. But the call, the message by the president and so on, I don't think it's necessary. It is just a public show to show that the president is concerned. The law should be applied, and the law says that these guys should be arrested and they should be prosecuted. There is no need for internal investigations by the military. It is not a purely military issue, which should have been handled by the military police. This is an open space where civilians were assaulted. the police should come in and do its job. And that is the only way that the military, which seems to feel that is superior to the police, can be brought to order. Otherwise, they are going to do that again, because the history is very bad. It's negative on how the military keeps on doing these things.
And you raise an important point, and that's another area we need to explore, which is that because we tend to use the military a lot in civilian affairs, and we had a period in the last few years where even military men became bodyguards for politicians. We saw that happen quite often. You raise an issue that the police should investigate what happened. I wonder, let me bring in Dr. Ishmael Normal into that, because we see that quite a lot. That call has been made, but we don't see the police feeling empowered to do so. We have filed the police report. I mean, Carlos was in the police station and filed the report, because when we went to the hospital, the doctors were, well, if you've been assaulted, then you have to go and file a police report before you come for the examination. And we did. Truth be told, we're not sure whether the police have done anything about it. But Dr. Ishmael Norman, what do you make of that suggestion by Professor Appiah-Jotian that the police should take the lead here? I mean, looking at the military and the way they operate, can the police investigate the military?
Professor Appiah is very correct about what he just said because of the locus of the incident. It didn't happen on a military barracks. It didn't happen on a military establishment. It happened in the civic space. That is under the domestic control of the Ghana police. You basically, if an ambassador goes out to commit a crime in the civic space, you fall under, with exception to certain conditionalities, because of the Geneva Covenant or Convention. However, in this particular incident, what they did in that public space, in that civic space, allows the police to come in. When the Minister of Defense announced the missing ammunitions from the military armory to national security, I argue very strongly that this is not the work investigation to be done by Ghana police because of the locus of the event. But this is an exception to that argument that I made previously. This event happened in a public space, and therefore, we, the people, represented by Ghana police, have the right to know. And we should know if the man who did the beating or the men that did the beating have been arrested, where they are. When
I mean, let me ask something that may seem like a silly question, but for mere mortals like us, just imagining the police arresting a military officer. I find that unimaginable. Is that even possible? It's theoretical, is it not? I mean, I can't for the life of me imagine that a police officer can go in there and arrest the military.
The domestic criminal law is managed by Ghana police, not Ghana military. Therefore, the mandate is within the Ghana police. Criminal investigation, the CID, prosecution, Ghana police, and Attorney General's office combined. You cannot then exclude Ghana police. They have to be part. Even if we're going to allow the military to be part, the lead, the primary investigators should be Ghana police. Some members from the military police can be the secondary investigators, but the primary, in criminology, we have the primary investigator, and then we have the secondary, the support. The support cannot be the military just for veracity. The tendency for the military to protect itself, its own members, is high. And therefore, in order to appear or to create the impression that justice is being pursued, this investigation has to be led by Ghana police.
Professor Appiah-Jotian, back to you on this. Legally, you made a point that the police should legally take the lead, but we haven't seen the police ever do that when the military is involved.
Well, there have been a few instances where the police have done so, but just one or two examples or scenarios that I know of. I recall, for example, at ANC more, there was a situation where I think on the eve of a new year, there was some soldier who was shooting in the air and so on. I think the police came in to cause the arrest, but I suspect it might have been a junior military officer. But overall, I would say 99% of the cases, the police have succumbed the power that they have under the law to the police, to the military. And it goes back to our history, even from the colonial period, which seeped into the independence period and the military coming into power and becoming the leaders, even where there was that military police joint administration somewhere in our political history. The military were on top of the police in the political arrangements that existed at the time. So that history has been there, and the police have not taken the space that have been given it under the Constitution to assert itself and to make sure that it controls the military as the law has been given it. So that is where I think there's a need for some education, some training for the military to know their place and for the police to also know that they have such powers, which they need to exercise so that there will be that civility and orderliness within the society, and which will ensure that the soldiers cannot do things as they want. And when you also trace it down to why this situation exists, it is also the influence of politics. Politics plays a big role in this. The politicians have used the military to do a lot of their dirty jobs for them, and they continue to do that. And we also know how the police is controlled by the politicians, and the fact that even the IGP is appointed by the president and so on. It all leads to a situation where the police is cowed and the military is given so much power. Look at the Ashama situation. Look at all the noise we made. And nothing was done to the military. I was surprised that there were some high-level academics and other even lawyers who were thinking that the military had the power to do what they did. It was very shocking. And because a military person has died, the military can take over control. And people are brutalized. Some are taken away to different locations that they cannot be located by their family members, and nothing happens. Even the member of parliament couldn't do anything more. And there was this sort of meeting to say that, oh, let's pacify them, let's have a meeting and, say we are sorry, and that ends it. The Committee on Defense and so on, they didn't do anything. And so that is why the soldiers can go on and do the things that they do, feeling that they are untouchable. But that should end. That should definitely end.
And I'll come back to you, Dr. Ashigbe. I was just going through the list of assaults this year alone. 13 just between January and July. And as I was saying, you don't see that in any other profession. You don't see that for lawyers. Can you imagine they say 13 lawyers have been assaulted this year alone, 13 judges, 13 MPs.
Even engineers.
13 engineers, 13 professors. You don't see that.
No, not at all.
So what is it about the journalist that make him so vulnerable and susceptible to assault?
So you see, the thing about it is that it's the journalist who's exposing people. And so normally the assaults, these people don't want to be exposed, and unfortunately, the tool they think they have is this issue of assault. And the reason why that continues to happen is because when it happens, there's no consequence, for that happening. I will go back again to the informal situation where, one of our football icons, Asamoah and his brother assaulted one of my staff, So it's been going on and on and on, and nothing seems to happen. And so that's why, for me, I think it's important that as journalists, we need to take our very, things into our hearts. And that's why, for me, the GJA place is important. And we need to get to a point where we start using the legal, powers that the Constitution gives to us. And it's the reason why and when the issue happened in Graphic, for example, I thought that it was important to use our power as journalists to say that if Asamoah has assaulted us, we're not going to cover anything that he does. We need to now get to a point where all of us then gather together as journalists and say we are not, anybody who is involved in this, till an action is taken, we're not going to report as well. And then we need to start getting to the point where we dedicate some time in the month to the cold cases, so far as, journalists are concerned. Because it's true, people will talk about the fact that others are abused. But as you said, if you look at all the professions, the people who people think that when anything happens, they should go at them are journalists. If we're going to be beating, by now, our politicians, we should be lining them up to beat them. Or, you have situations where you go to the hospitals and somebody will lose. Nobody goes there going to attack anybody. And that's not what we ought to do. So as journalists, and then again, it's also important that one of the challenges we have is that you have newsrooms that are divided along political lines. Or you also have this big thing of politicians then owning the media spaces. And the unfortunate thing is that it is not the unethical journalists that are beating. Most of the time you find out that those who are doing an ethical job, they are the reasons who are beating. You have situations where you have somebody who currently is vying for office, actually say we should beat the hell out of a journalist. In some places, he will not even dare go close to the leadership of any institutions. But we tend to tolerate that. A party, is tolerating that and allowing this person to come into that space. And so as journalists, I think the time has come. And then also for owners of media houses, a lot of the challenges we face, we need to now start finding ways. And I'm happy that in this particular situation, immediately this thing happened, the cameras rolled on so that we're able to capture it. Those are the things that all of us as journalists we do. We need to now start getting ways in which we can protect ourselves, train ourselves as to how do you handle situations like this when you find yourself in this space. Because you see, we don't do journalism to be martyrs. That's not why we get into journalism. And so we need to also start preparing ourselves, providing ourselves the resources that we require so that when these things happen, we find ways in which we'll be able to deal with it. So I think that the time has come, where we currently are and our edge, the GJA and every, Ghanaian who really holds our democracy due and say that the president himself is a member of us. And I will not take what he said as just a fluke. I will want to believe that he really means it, which means that we're going to be hoping that we're going to get some responses from him so far as this order that he's giving, and we should be demanding it. And so that we can all push and make sure that this thing does not continue.
Yeah, I mean, I want to return to the security military theme. So, but we've also seen, as you mentioned, the police have assaulted us. The military have assaulted us. Sometimes the national security, they don't even know where to put them. They also assault us. But those are the group of people who should be protecting us.
Correct.
But they tend to assault us.
And even, you see, if you go back and look at the data you will find out that the people who do a lot more of this, unfortunately, are the security service. So the police, the military, the national security, those are the people. And I'm pretty sure in this particular operation, it was more a national security operation than a military one.
Yeah, that's why the guy
took to Blue Gate. Why didn't they take him to Bemakam or any of the place? Bemakam is close by where the thing had happened. So this thing, I'm pretty sure, is this whole contraption that we're calling national security. I'm pretty sure that because there was a gentleman there wearing a red and blue, exactly, wielding weapons. So I'm pretty sure that this thing happened under their command.
Yeah, and indeed. I know for certain that it was a national security operation. But that raises the question, and Dr. Ishmael Norman, this I know for certain was a national security operation because I tried to intervene to get my colleague released because he was picked up. But how come a national security operation had members of the Ghana Armed Forces executing that operation? That baffles me quite a bit.
Well, you know, in Ghana, we take everything and bastardize it. The national security is not supposed to be carrying arms, and we have learned from the Minister of Defense, Dr. Omane Boama, that thousands of ammunitions have been transferred to the national security. Meanwhile, they don't have a standing force. So something is going on with our national security unit that really needs to be questioned. The subcommittee on defense and interior is not coming clean with us on these activities. And I actually wish that the Attorney General would have allowed that young man who is accused of maybe embezzling $7 million something that was working for the Signals Bureau, that he wanted to talk about some of the activities of national security. Let him talk in camera, behind closed doors, so that we see what has the national security morphed into. Because it looks like it has evolved into a standing army, some kind of a militia. But it is not permitted within our laws to have all those ammunitions, all those guns. But every time you see a national security guy, they announce themselves to you. I'm from the national security, and there's always a sidearm. Well, it doesn't happen like that in many other places except Ghana, because we are good at bastardizing everything that is supposed to be maintained in a pristine manner.
Are we too quick to deploy the military for things that otherwise the police should be dealing with? And I asked that question knowing that we actually, once upon a time, very recently, and I know this government tried to discontinue it, we were using members of the Ghana Armed Forces, military men, as bodyguards for civilian appointees. I mean, we saw that. I mean, the Electoral Commission chairperson had military protection. The defense, the Attorney General at the time had, military men driving with him, and many others had military men as protection. I mean, how do you have a military high command, right? And because you know how the military works, at least we are told that the command structure is very clear. How do you then have that so co-opted to the whims of civilian political appointees who are operating below the president, who is the commander-in-chief? Because the commander-in-chief himself, we don't see him go out with military protection. I mean, and that baffles me.
Evans, I can't wait for even the Ghana police to stop giving police protection to anybody. There are Supreme Court justices who don't even go anywhere with the protection that they are giving. But you know what? We have become addicted to feeling good and important, big, arrogant, to have a soldier behind us, so that whether we need the soldier behind us or not, we want to have it. Under the civil-military relations or relationship, the military is trying to find favor. Some of them, not everybody, but we can see many of them are trying to find favor, because beyond the rank of colonel, before you move on to brigadier general, you need a civilian to basically support you and push you through. And that is why some of these decisions appear to be going towards weird direction, because there shouldn't be that kind of protection at all. We are using the military a bit too much, and I don't want to see that. But of course, who am I? I am just a taxpayer. I am just an ordinary citizen. And some people will even prefer that I'm just a spectator, not a participant.
Professor Pejuchan, legally though, and I'm looking at citizens who feel assaulted by a military officer, if the police is not willing to take the matter on, can you use a law to get at the military if indeed you feel your rights have been violated by a military officer?
Yeah, interestingly, we have the and a law, that is the Security and Intelligence Agencies Act, which has a procedure for issuing complaints about how one is mistreated by a security person, which then would trigger the setting up of investigations by the Director General to be able to deal the matter within, I think, a 30-day period. And if that doesn't happen, then the matter can be reported to the Chief Justice to set up a tribunal to deal with this matter. I think this is a law that is hardly used or mentioned, but it can also serve as a means to ensure that people who feel violated or whose rights are violated by the military or any other security person can resort to such provision in our laws to...
Which law is this again? It's a fascinating piece of legislation.
This is the Security and Intelligence Agencies Act 2020. Okay. Yes.
Okay. In other words, on the back of this incident, ASIA multimedia can trigger this clause?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, and any civilian, of course, can use the same if a police officer or a military officer assaults them. And does this cover the military too?
Yes, because it's talking about the security agency. So if you look at the definition of or the who comes under that definition, yes, they can fall in there, and that can be a basis to call to issue a complaint and for investigations to be conducted within that time frame, which is the 30 days.
Would you, there's some who say we should simply keep the military out of the civil space. Unless you have a Boku, we should never have the military in our space, of course, but we've normalized it now. We have the Operation Calm Life, where the military worked closely with the police on anti-armed robbery operations. And so the argument there is, these excesses is just a price you pay for law and order. Do you buy the argument?
Well, there are situations where you definitely need the military because security issues can deteriorate, and there are certain situations where the police may not be able to perform such functions effectively. And so that's why the law allows for military-police engagements, joint security activities where necessary. For example, the Boku situation is a good example. So in such situations, we cannot avoid the role of the military. The military can be called in to deal with some, in case of emergencies, whether it's natural emergencies, maybe serious flooding. The military have some divisions of it can build bridges within the matter of hours based on some expertise they have. So we need the military in certain situations, but the law specifies how that should be done. It is at sometimes it's at the invitation of the police or at the president, or we have this DISEC and RECSEC and so on. Depending on how they assess the security situation, they can call for the military to come in. So we should, the bottom line is to know when and where the military can be called in so that we know the limits and they will not take the law into their own hands as and when they want to intervene in issues. A military person wants to deal with maybe land gas in a particular area because it is putting up a building. Then the military is taken there to brutalize the land gas and to have that building constructed. This is a violation or abuse of the use of the military in dealing with issues which is not clearly within the mandate of the military to do.
And thank you. I want to take a quick break. When I return, Dr. Ashigbe is still with me. So this conversation we've been having for a long time. What must change for us to see progress? Because already this year, we've talked about 13 cases of assault on a journalist. So clearly something, either the advocacy isn't working. Last year, we did a whole campaign called Defend Media Freedom. The IGP was there. We did it for a month. We had commitments. Dr. Ashigbe was there. Everybody, including the diplomatic, everybody pledged to do something about it. Then year after, first 6 months, 13 assault cases alone. I mean, something must happen to stop this. So what must happen? And then I'll get Dr. Norman's take on is the military in the civilian space a necessary evil? We should just make do with the excesses because really law and order is the ultimate objective here. And if that is not good enough, then what is? Should we simply equip the police to do more? Because as a society, we don't really consider the police effective in dealing with insecurity situations. That is why we have a penchant to always bring the police in. I'll get your thoughts on what must change for us to maintain the police, regardless of what is happening in the security space. And after this. And thank you for staying with us here on PM Express. Just wrapping up on this big conversation about military and civilian space. And I still have with me Dr. Ken Ashigbe, also with me Dr. Ishmael Norman and Professor P.J. Tia. Dr. Ashigbe, so we were just been talking about the challenges that journalists face on a daily basis. If you look at the trend in our Press Freedom Index shows, you've been campaigning on this for for decades now. Yeah. And every year, just for the first 6 months, you have 13 cases. We've tried every trick in the book. We've had a GJA that for the first time had the courage to boycott the politician and boycott a few politicians. They are now threatening to boycott the military and the police, etc., which we must do. But it doesn't appear that it's stopping.
Well, so again, I think one novelty is getting the president himself condemning an act that has happened. Yeah. So I believe that for all of us as journalists, we need this, that's the pressure point. We need to, because you see, we're in an executive presidency, so we need to apply that pressure so that we can get the president to start looking into getting to ensure that his attorney general, his IGP, get these cases investigated. So we need to take advantage of these crises. Because, you see, the thing that will let this thing stop is the issue of consequence. The reason why this has not stopped is the fact that there are no consequences. It happens and people just get away with it for free. So the biggest thing in the room, again, is His Excellency, you've done the big step that you have done by saying this. What we would need you to do is to ensure that you deal with all of those 13 cases, especially this particular one, and don't just leave it there. Go back into the last 8 years, and that's why for me, if we lose this opportunity, if you go back and look into the index, you will find out that in the President John Mahama's time, the index improved a bit. Yeah. And then it went down in the MPP. If we allow this 13 to continue, then it means we're going to continue from where, President Anado left it, where we're now going down into the doldrums. And so it's important that we take advantage of this. For me, it's a point of inflection where for the very first time since I got into Joy FM here as Chief Technology Officer, when we've had a president actually openly condemn it. So we need to push it because that's the first thing that we need to do. And then after we've done that and then we are seeing the prosecution, if it does not happen, I've been telling Suleiman Brahma that I think what they did in Gambia, where they took a case to the ECOWAS court in Gambia against Yahya Jammeh, is one of the things that one of the last aces that we need to play. So if we don't get that happening, we need to then go. Because again, as we've said, you find out that state actors are the big people who do that. So we need to test that and make sure that we're pushing that particular angle. And then after we've done all of that, then we need to start asking, and making sure that we're getting protection for our journalists when they get into these spaces. In as much as Carlos's case is a bad one, I think that it's one of the things that as journalists we need to start working on. so that when the thing happens, when this thing happens, that is the time when you should start turning our cameras on. So the time for journalists going into these places wearing body cams is one of the things that we need to also do as a means of protecting ourselves. So when they come, they know that immediately happens, I hit a button, and that particular content should not even go onto my particular feed. It should go onto multiple social media feeds so that we can have that evidence. I know that one of the things lawyers like Samson and co ask for all the time is this feed, so that then we can take it to court when these things are going to happen. Again, we need to get journalists and media houses also learn taking a feed from you, multimedia, where when this thing happens, and the GJA should also start looking for lawyers who will be sitting, who will do two things. One, the criminal cases go and have a watching brief so that they are in court when these cases are happening, and then also be able to immediately start taking civil action against these people. So we start hitting people where it really hurts. So we need to get that also happening, get the protection happening, and we need to start courting, businesses also to say that, when these things are happening, you need to support us to protect ourselves. Yeah. Otherwise, there'll be no media houses for you to also do. And finally, it is for all of journalists to come together and say that we want to all advocate more vociferously, and we should support our GJA. And I'm hoping that we don't get to the point where the ultimatum that has been, called upon comes. But if that should come, we should all come together and be able to support that and make sure that this actually works. But I believe that the move that the president has made is a novel one that has happened. It's never happened before, and we need to take advantage of it and ensure that this will result in some change.
Yeah, I mean, since you mentioned the president, I want to throw that to Dr. Ishmael Norman. Doc, the president is a commander-in-chief. He must have seen what happened to Carlos, and of course, because he's a card-bearing member of the GJA, swiftly condemned it. But as we've been speaking, we know that the issue with the military in civilian space and their penchant to assault civilians is pretty high. The cases are quite a lot to mention. What do you expect the president to do now in the wake of this latest report? If you take the examples that we've cited some of them here, if you go all the way back to the Ashaiman case, for example, still lingering. We haven't had closure to that. We've seen the 7 soldiers who beat the 3 civilians over an alleged stolen phone in Kumasi. That one too. The brutality during the curfew in Wale Wale. Again, that's a subject of some controversy. The Ashaiman one is another one. Soldiers storming Parliament. We all know what happened there. Soldiers being used as bodyguards. The president clearly identified as a problem, right? He's actually part of when he condemned, he also says that the military should find workshops and trainings that allows them to be more focused on the human rights part of this. What sort of leadership do you want? Because he's the commander-in-chief. What changes must happen to stop this from happening again?
Evans, I believe that the president is on the right tangent for actually feeling the pain of the people that were assaulted. And as a commander-in-chief, he's playing his role given to him by the Constitution. But he is humanistic enough to say that, yes, go and enforce peace, but don't do bad things. Go and destroy, because the Ramsar site would not have been, buildings would not be collapsed without the president's approval or know-how or say so. So he said, go and do your work, but don't go and beat up people. So we have to commend the president for that. I believe that the military engagement is not going to go away because the Constitution sanctions it. Interestingly, General Champong organized his coup because the military were asked to do flood emergency duty. Because in those days, the military were not being used for emergency intervention or things like that. And so I believe that there's a long history of the military not getting involved with emergency intervention, with peace enforcement and all of that. And so it is up to the leadership of the country to moderate the excesses of the military when we engage them in emergency intervention, in disturbances, and in peace enforcement. I believe that when President Mahama said the military should come out with their protocols, he wasn't kidding. Do you think that if the military had a manual for peace enforcement or disturbances, do you think the president would have said that? I don't think so. And so for me, we take a lot of things for granted. Ghana military is still operating on the protocols of the British. They're a bit lazy in designing their own homegrown manuals, SOPs. They are still, we've been independent for over 60 years, and yet they are still using. It's sad for an independent sovereign nation to be using the protocols of a colonial master. Are we still under colonial powers? No. So for the president to say that publicly, if you decode the message, you understand that there's a lot of work they have to do to put the manuals together for peace enforcement. There should be a manual. It is not in Boko that you're going to tell the soldiers you want you to return to your families in peace. They should have gone through simulation exercises. If you're going to use them, train them well. If not, every night, believe it or not, as a Christian, every night I pray that nobody, no soldier shoots anybody in Boko, because the moment they do, they will pour dirty water, without due respect, Sabita Frache, on Asante Hene and on the president of Ghana. The moment they do that, I hope it never happens. And that's why I said I am very fearful. They need to deploy some clinical psychologists, not reverends, not imams. Clinical psychologists to be embedded with them and train them and advise them from time to time, because what they are doing is very close to war situation.
Yeah, Dr. Ashman Norman, thank you very much, and Dr. Ashibe and Professor Appeji to enjoy the rest of your evening.